The stars had always called to humanity. But humanity had never expected the stars to answer back in the year 2307, 40 years before everything changed. A ship appeared in Earth's sky that did not belong to any nation on the planet. Vessel was beautiful in a way that human eyes had never seen before, with curves that seemed to flow like water and a hull that glowed with soft blue light. Like moonlight captured in metal, the world held its breath. Every military on Earth pointed weapons at the sky. Every scientist scrambled to make sense of their readings. And every ordinary person looked up and wondered if this was the end or the beginning. It was the beginning. Beings that emerged from that ship called themselves the Veloth. And they were unlike anything humanity had imagined aliens would be. They stood tall and slender, with skin that shifted colors like the surface of a soap bubble, and they glowed from within. A soft bioluminescence that pulsed gently with their emotions when they were happy. They shimmered gold, and when they were sad, they dimmed to deep violet. They had come to Earth in secret, they explained, breaking the laws of something called the Galactic Council. The Council had placed Earth under quarantine centuries ago, declaring humans too violent, too unpredictable, too dangerous to be allowed into the galactic community. The Veloth had watched humanity from afar for a long time, and they had seen something different. They had seen a species that fought terrible wars, but also built hospitals in the rubble afterward. A species that could hate with frightening passion, but could also love with the same intensity. A species that fell down again and again, but never stopped getting back up. The Veloth ambassador, a gentle being named Shelvar, spoke to the United Nations in a voice that sounded like wind chimes in a summer breeze. "We have studied many species across many stars," Shelvar said, her skin rippling with warm amber light, "and we have never found one quite like you, with your burning hearts and your stubborn hope. And we believe you deserve a chance to prove the Council wrong." Not everyone on Earth trusted the Veloth at first. There were protests and debates and angry politicians who warned that this was a trap, that these glowing aliens wanted something from humanity, that nothing in the universe came for free. But the Veloth asked for nothing. They shared their knowledge freely, teaching humanity how to bend space and travel between stars, how to generate clean energy that would never run out, how to cure diseases that had plagued humans for centuries. In return, humanity offered the only thing they had. That the Veloth seemed to value friendship. The Veloth were scholars and artists and healers, beings who had evolved beyond violence so long ago that they had almost forgotten what it felt like to be afraid. They had no armies, no weapons, no concept of war as humans understood it. They had survived in the galaxy by being useful to everyone and threatening to no one, by staying small and quiet and hoping the larger powers would leave them alone. But something about humanity fascinated them. They were drawn to human music, especially the sad songs, the ones filled with longing and loss and defiance. They spent hours in human museums, staring at paintings that depicted battles and tragedies and moments of desperate courage. They watched human films and wept at stories that humans considered ordinary, stories about people who sacrificed everything for those they loved. "You feel everything so deeply," Shelvar once told the human ambassador, a patient woman named Elena Vasquez, "and yet you do not break under the weight of it all," which we find both terrifying and beautiful. For 40 years, the partnership between Earth and the Veloth grew. Stronger human engineers worked alongside Veloth scientists to build ships that could cross the galaxy in weeks instead of centuries. Human doctors learned Veloth healing techniques and combined them with human medicine to create treatments that saved millions of lives. Human artists collaborated with Veloth creators to produce works that made beings across the galaxy weep with emotions they could not name. The Galactic Council watched all of this with growing unease. The Council was made up of the 12 oldest and most powerful species in the galaxy. Beings who had ruled the stars for 10,000 years and did not appreciate change. They had quarantined humanity for a reason. And now the Velith were undoing all their careful work 3 times. The Council summoned the Velith to explain themselves 3 times. The Velith ambassadors stood before the most powerful beings in the galaxy and defended humanity. They are young and sometimes foolish, Shalvara admitted. But they are also brave and kind and full of potential that you cannot see, because you have already decided what they are. The Council was not convinced High Counselor Vethan, a creature of angles and shadow who had led the Council for 3 centuries, delivered an ultimatum. Sever your ties with the humans, Vethan commanded. Return them to their quarantine. Forget this foolish experiment, or face the consequences. Shalvara's skin flushed deep red, a color the Velith only showed when they were truly angry, which was almost never. We have looked into the hearts of humanity, she said, her voice still gentle, but now carrying an edge that made several counselors shift uncomfortably. And we have found them worthy of our friendship and our trust. And we will not abandon our friends because you are afraid of what they might become. The council chamber fell silent. No species had defied the council so openly in living memory high. Councilor Vethan stared at the small, glowing Velith ambassador for a long moment, then spoke 3 words that would echo through history. So be it. Shelvera returned to Earth and told Ambassador Vasquez what had happened. I am not sorry for what I said, Shelvera told her human friend, because some things are worth fighting for, even if we do not know how to fight. Elena Vasquez hugged the Velith ambassador, something that still surprised the Velith after 40 years, because their species did not embrace the way humans did. Whatever happens, Elena promised, we will face it together. 3 days later, the council's response arrived. It was not a message, it was a fleet. The Velith homeworld was called Luminara, a name that meant place of gentle light in their ancient language. It was a world of soft hills and silver forests, of oceans that glowed pink at sunset and cities that grew from the ground like flowers. Organic and beautiful and completely without walls, because the Velith had never needed to keep anything out. 7 billion Velith lived on Luminara, and they woke that morning to skies filled with ships that blotted out their 3 suns' 12 executor fleets. The Council's instruments of absolute destruction had arrived without warning. The Velith had no military, no planetary shields, no weapons capable of scratching the paint on a Council warship. They had songs, and art and medicine, and a belief that the universe would protect those who meant no harm. The universe did not protect them. High Counselor Vethan did not bother with demands or ultimatums or any of the diplomatic rituals that usually preceded violence. The Velith had been given their chance to obey, and they had chosen defiance. And now they would serve as an example to every species in the galaxy. This is what happens to those who befriend humanity. Bombardment began at dawn and continued for 6 hours. Plasma fire rained from orbit, turning the silver forests to ash and boiling the pink oceans into steam. The beautiful organic cities melted like candles in a furnace, and millions of Velith died in the first minutes, too quickly to even understand what was happening. But millions more survived that first wave, huddled in underground shelters and caves, and anywhere they could find protection from the fire falling from the sky. And as they waited to die, the Velith did the only thing they knew how to do. They sang. The death songs of the Velith were ancient beyond measure, passed down through countless generations for moments exactly like this. Moments when there was nothing left to do but face the end with dignity. The songs were transmitted across every frequency that Dios Velith could reach, and they spread through subspace like ripples in a pond, carrying the voices of a dying species to anyone who would listen on Earth. Ambassador Elena Vasquez received the transmission in her office at the United Nations, and she sat frozen at her desk. As the sounds filled the room, the Velith voices were beautiful, even in their final moments, harmonizing in ways that human music could never quite match. And the songs told stories of hope and love and friendship. They sang about Earth. They sang about the strange, fierce creatures who had become their dearest friends. The beings with burning hearts who felt everything so deeply. They sang about how humanity had changed them, had taught them that some things were worth risking everything for. And they sang that they did not regret their choice in the shelters beneath the burning cities. Velith younglings cried and clung to their parents, and the parents held them close and sang softer songs, lullabies meant to comfort children in the dark. The council ships recorded everything because Vethan wanted the galaxy to see what happened to those who defied the council's will. And so the recordings captured it all, a plasma fire consuming the last shelters, the songs growing quieter as fewer voices remained to sing them. The final transmission from Shelvara herself, who had returned to her homeworld when the attack began because she refused to let her people die alone. To our friends on Earth, Shelvara's voice came through the static. Weak but still gentle, still kind. Do not blame yourselves for this, because we chose this path knowing where it might lead, and we would choose it again. Her skin was flickering erratically, the bioluminescence failing as her body failed. But she managed one last smile for the camera. You taught us that some things are worth dying for, she said. And now we ask you to remember that some things are worth living for too. So please live, please thrive. Please prove that our faith in you was not misplaced. The transmission ended. Bombardment continued for another hour after that, because the council wanted to be thorough when it was finally over. Luminara was a dead world, its surface scorched black and lifeless. 7 billion Velith reduced to ash and memory. The council broadcast the destruction to every corner of the galaxy, along with a simple message: the quarantine of Earth remains in effect, and any species that violates this quarantine will share the fate of the Velith. So let this be a lesson to all who would challenge the wisdom of the council on Earth. The recordings arrived 3 days after the attack, delayed by the vast distances of Space President Yuki Tanaka of the United Earth Parliament gathered her cabinet to watch them. And they sat in terrible silence as the images played: the burning cities, the dying forests, the children crying in the shelters, the songs, the final words of Shelvara. When the recording ended, no one spoke for a long time. Several cabinet members were weeping openly, and others sat with their fists clenched so tightly that their knuckles had turned. White President Tanaka did not weep. She sat perfectly still, her face blank, her eyes fixed on the screen, even though it now showed only static. Then she stood and walked to the window that overlooked the Pacific Ocean. The same ocean that humanity had once thought was the largest thing in the universe. Back before they knew how small they really were, her cabinet waited, unsure what to do, unsure what anyone could do. The council had just demonstrated that they could destroy an entire species without consequence. And Earth had no fleets, no weapons, nothing that could even slow down a single executor ship. They were helpless. President Tanaka turned from the window, and her cabinet saw something in her eyes that they had never seen before. Something cold and hard and utterly without mercy. Recall every human, she said, her voice flat and calm in a way that was somehow more frightening than screaming would have been. Every ambassador, every scientist, every traitor, every single human being anywhere in the galaxy. Bring them all home. Her chief of staff stammered a question about diplomatic protocols and ongoing negotiations. There is nothing to negotiate, President Tanaka said. There is nothing to discuss, and there will be no more talking with species who speak to us in fire. She turned back to the window. The Velith believed in us, she said quietly, almost to herself. They died singing songs about us, hoping we would remember them, hoping we would prove them right. Her reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, someone harder and more dangerous than the woman who had taken office promising peace and cooperation. "We will remember," she said, "and we will prove them right. But first, we will teach the galaxy what it means to make an enemy of humanity." Earth went dark that night. Every embassy closed. Every communication channel severed. Every human ship racing home at maximum speed. The galaxy watched in confusion, expecting humanity to collapse into grief and despair. They had no idea what was coming. For 3 years, Earth was silent. The Galactic Council sent probe after probe to the Sol system, trying to understand what the humans were doing. But every probe was destroyed before it could transmit anything useful. Council intelligence analysts wrote reports dismissing the humans as a broken species, a civilization that had retreated into isolation to mourn their dead friends, a threat that had been neutralized before it could ever truly become a threat. High Counselor Vethan read these reports and felt satisfied with his decision. The Velith had been weak, and their destruction had served its purpose. And now the humans would spend the next few centuries learning to accept their place in the galactic order. He was wrong beneath the surface of Earth, in facilities that stretched for hundreds of kilometers under mountains and deserts and ocean floors. Humanity was transforming itself. The old divisions died first, within weeks of the Velith massacre. Every nation on Earth dissolved its individual military and merged into a single force called the United Earth. Navy politicians who had spent their careers arguing about borders and trade agreements and ancient grievances stood together and agreed that none of that mattered anymore. There was no more American or Chinese or Russian or Brazilian. There was only human. The scientists came next. Thousands of the brightest minds on Earth working together in ways that would have been impossible before, sharing data and ideas without any of the secrecy and competition that had slowed human progress for centuries. They studied every piece of Velith technology that remained on Earth, reverse engineering the gifts their friends had given them and pushing them further than the Velith had ever imagined. They analyzed the debris from council ships that the Velith had secretly collected over the years, learning the weaknesses that the council had never bothered to fix because no one had ever challenged them. They built Admiral James Okonkwo had been a naval commander in the old world, respected but not remarkable, a man who had spent his career hoping he would never have to fight a real war. No, he stood in an underground hangar the size of a small city, watching construction drones assemble the skeleton of something that had never existed before, a human warship. The council species had been building warships for 10,000 years, and their designs were elegant and efficient, and almost identical across all 12 founding species, because they had all been fighting the same kinds of wars for so long that they had forgotten any other way. Human engineers looked at those designs and threw them away. The council fights wars of position. Admiral Okonkwo explained to his senior officers during one of their endless planning sessions. They line up their fleets and exchange fire until one side retreats. And they have been doing this for so long that they cannot imagine any other approach. He pulled up a holographic display showing council battle formations, precise geometric shapes that had not changed in millennia. They have never faced an enemy who treats war as an art form, he said. An enemy who sees rules as suggestions and impossible as a challenge. An enemy who will sacrifice everything for victory and laugh while doing it. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. They have never faced humans. The first human dreadnought rolled off the assembly line 18 months after the Velith died, and the workers who built her gathered in silence as she emerged from the construction bay. She was not beautiful like council ships, not elegant or graceful. She was brutal, angular, covered in weapons that the council had banned centuries ago. because they were considered too destructive, too indiscriminate, too cruel. They named her Shale Vorath. Workers cheered when the name was announced, and some of them wept. And Admiral Conquo stood on the observation deck and watched and felt something he had not felt in a long time. Hope by the end of the second year, there were 50 ships like the Shelvora, and by the end of the third year, there were 300. The council would have been horrified if they had known, because their entire combined fleet numbered only about 500 ships, and they had assumed it would take humanity centuries to build anything that could challenge them. They did not understand what humans could accomplish when they stopped fighting each other and started working together. They did not understand what humans could accomplish when they were angry. The soldiers trained alongside the ships, men and women from every nation on Earth, learning to fight in ways that no species in the galaxy had attempted in millennia. They practiced boarding actions, the art of forcing entry onto enemy vessels and fighting room to room, something the Council considered suicidal because ship-to-ship combat had evolved beyond such primitive tactics thousands of years ago. The human Marines practiced it until they could do it in their sleep. They learned to fly fighters in ways that should have killed them, pulling maneuvers that subjected their bodies to forces that would have liquefied a Council pilot, surviving only because human engineers had developed suits that could keep them alive through almost anything. They painted images on their armor, crude drawings of glowing figures with shifting colors. The Velith they were fighting to avenge, and they waited. President Tanaka addressed the United Earth Parliament on the 3rd anniversary of the Velith massacre, standing in the same chamber where she had ordered the recall of every human in the galaxy. 3 years ago, she said, the Council murdered our friends to teach us a lesson about our place in the universe. And for 3 years, we have been silent, letting them believe that their lesson was learned. She looked out at the assembled representatives, at the military commanders, at the scientists and engineers who had made the impossible possible. The lesson they tried to teach us was that we are small and weak and alone, she said. But the lesson we actually learned was very different. Her voice hardened. We learned that the galaxy speaks in fire, and we have spent 3 years learning to speak that language better than anyone in history. She raised her hand, and the lights in the chamber dimmed as a holographic display activated behind her, showing the full strength of the United Earth Navy. 300 warships and 10,000 fighters and 1 million soldiers ready to deploy. Tomorrow, President Tanaka said. We begin our reply. The chamber erupted in a sound that was not quite cheering, something rawer and more primal. The sound of a species that had been wounded and was finally ready to wound back. Admiral Okonkwo watched from the back of the chamber and thought of the Velith, of their gentle songs and their belief that humanity was worth dying for. We will prove them right, he said quietly, to no one but himself and the dead. I promise you, we will prove them right. The war began at 0600 Galactic Standard Time on a day that the Council would later call the Day of Fire. It ended 93 days later. And by the time it was over, the galaxy would never be the same. The Council expected humanity to attack their military installations first, because that was how wars were fought. That was how wars had always been fought. And the Council had been fighting wars for 10,000 years. Humanity did not attack their military installations instead. The first wave of human ships appeared in 17 different systems simultaneously, targeting supply depots and fuel stations and communication relays. The unglamorous infrastructure that kept the Council's war machine running within 6 hours. The Council's ability to coordinate. Their fleets had been crippled. High Counselor Vethan received the reports in his command center and felt the first cold touch of something he had not experienced in centuries. Fear. How is this possible? He demanded. staring at the tactical display as more and more systems went dark. They should not have ships capable of this. They should not have the numbers for this. They should not even know where these facilities are located. His advisors had no answers. The truth was that humanity had spent 3 years studying every scrap of intelligence the Veleth had gathered. Every rumor and whisper about Council operations. Every weakness that the Council had never bothered to fix because they had never needed to. The Council had not fought a real war in over 1,000 years. And their defenses had grown complacent. Humanity had been fighting wars against itself for all of recorded history. And they had learned lessons that the Council could not imagine. Admiral Thesic of the Executor Fleet was the first Council commander to engage the human navy directly. And he approached the battle with the confidence of a species that had never lost. His fleet outnumbered the human force 2-1. And his ships were larger and more heavily armed. And he had been winning battles since before humanity had discovered fire. He ordered his ships into standard formation and prepared to demonstrate the superiority of Council military doctrine. Human ships did not form a line. They scattered, breaking into small groups that darted and weaved through space in patterns that made no tactical sense. Refusing to engage in the orderly exchange of fire the Council commanders expected. Admiral Thesic watched in confusion as his targeting system struggled to track the human vessels, which moved with a speed and agility that should have been impossible for ships their size. They are too fast, his sensor officer reported, voice trembling. Their acceleration rates are far beyond our specifications, and they are taking maneuvers that would kill any Council crew. Thesic did not understand, could not understand, because he had never encountered a species willing to push themselves to the edge of death just to gain a tactical advantage. The human pilots were experiencing forces that would have crushed Council bodies, surviving only through a combination of advanced suit technology and sheer stubborn refusal to die. And then the fighters arrived. Council doctrine held that fighters were obsolete, too small to carry meaningful weapons, too fragile to survive modern naval combat. Humanity disagreed. Thousands of tiny craft swarmed out of the human capital ships, each one piloted by a human who had trained for years for this moment, each one carrying weapons designed specifically to exploit the weaknesses in Council armor that the Veleth had identified decades ago. Admiral Thesic watched his tactical display fill with red icons as the fighters tore through his formation. Too numerous to track, too fast to hit, too small to stop. They are targeting our engines, someone shouted. They are targeting our sensor arrays. They are not trying to destroy us. They are trying to disable us. Thesic felt his flagship shudder as human fighters strafed his engine section. And he suddenly understood what the humans were doing. They were not trying to win a naval battle. They were trying to board his ship. Impossible, he said. But even as he spoke, alarms began blaring throughout the vessel, indicating breaches in the outer hull. Human marines were cutting their way through his armor with plasma torches, forcing entry into his ship to fight hand-to-hand in the corridors and compartments. No one had attempted boarding actions in millennia because it was considered suicide, because modern warships had defenses specifically designed to prevent such primitive tactics. The humans did not care about the defenses. They came anyway, fighting their way through corridors filled with automated weapons, taking casualties that would have broken any Council force. And still pushing forward. Thesic's last sight was a human marine cutting through the door to his bridge, armor scarred and dented from dozens of impacts. A crude painting of a glowing Veleth figure on the chest plate. The marine removed his helmet, revealing a young face with eyes that held no mercy. "This is for Luminara," the marine said. And then Thesic saw nothing at all. The battle was over in 4 hours. Thesic's fleet was captured almost intact, their crews either dead or imprisoned. Their ships being towed back to human space for study and salvage. Word of the defeat spread through the council like fire. And with it spread terror. The humans were not supposed to be able to do this. They were primitives, quarantined for their own good, barely capable of reaching their own moon when the Velith had found them. But the fleet that was carving through council space was not primitive. It was terrifying. Battle after battle followed the same pattern. Human forces appearing where they were not expected, striking targets that should have been safe, using tactics that no council commander could predict or counter. They turned asteroids into weapons, accelerating massive rocks to speeds that made them more destructive than any missile. They used their own ships as battering rams when necessary, crews evacuating at the last moment before impact. They fought with a ferocity and creativity that the council had never seen, because the council had never fought an enemy that truly hated them one by one. The 12 founding species of the council sued for peace. Humanity refused. "We did not start this war to negotiate," Admiral Okonkwo transmitted to the council's peace delegation. "We started this war to finish it, and we will not stop until we are standing on your doorstep." The delegation withdrew, and the war continued. On the 91st day, the human fleet arrived at the council homeworld, and High Counselor Vethan looked out his window at the ships filling his sky and knew that everything he had built was about to end. He had tried to teach humanity their place in the universe instead. They had taught him his. The human fleet hung in the sky above the council homeworld like a judgment made manifest. 300 warships and thousands of fighters. Enough firepower to reduce the planet below to ash. High Counselor Vethan stood in his command center and watched the ships through the observation window, waiting for the bombardment to begin, waiting to experience what he had inflicted on Luminara 3 years ago. The bombardment did not come. Instead, his communication systems crackled to life with a transmission from the human flagship, the Shalvara, and a human voice filled his chamber. "High Counselor Vethan," the voice said, calm and measured. "This is President Yuki Tanaka of the United Earth Parliament, and I am calling to offer you a choice." Vethan's advisors urged him to respond, to negotiate, to surrender, to do anything that might save them from the fate they had brought upon themselves. He transmitted his reply with trembling hands. "What do you want?" he demanded, his voice carrying none of the authority it once held. "Name your terms, and we will give you anything. Reparations, territory, technology, whatever you desire. Just tell us what will satisfy you." There was a pause, and when President Tanaka spoke again, her voice had changed, becoming harder and colder. "3 years ago," she said, "you murdered 7 billion innocent beings to teach the galaxy a lesson about what happens to those who befriend humanity. And you broadcast their deaths across every frequency so that everyone would see and learn and fear." Another pause. "Today, we are going to teach a different lesson." Vethan braced himself for the order to fire. But instead, something unexpected happened. Human ships moved to surround the planet, not in attack formation, but in a blockade pattern, cutting off all traffic in and out of the system at the same time. Other human vessels approached the Council's central communication array, the most powerful broadcast system in the galaxy, capable of transmitting to every corner of known space. Human technicians boarded the array and took control without firing a single shot, and then they began to broadcast every recording of the Velith massacre, every order that Vethan had given, every document that proved the Council had planned and executed the genocide of an entire species, every message the Council had exchanged afterward, congratulating themselves on their decisive action, dismissing the Velith as acceptable losses, joking about how easily the glowing weaklings had died, every piece of evidence that the 12 founding species had known exactly what they were doing and had done it anyway. The galaxy watched, and the galaxy listened, and the galaxy finally understood what the Council truly was. President Tanaka's voice returned to the broadcast. "We did not come here to destroy you," she said, addressing not just Vethan but every being in the galaxy who was watching, "because destruction would make us no better than you. And the friends we lost believed we were better than that." Her voice softened slightly, carrying something that might have been sadness. The Vela saw something in humanity that we did not always see in ourselves, a capacity for both terrible violence and boundless compassion. And they chose to believe in our better nature, even when we gave them every reason to doubt. They died singing songs about us, hoping we would prove them right, hoping we would show the galaxy that their faith was not misplaced. We will not dishonor their memory by becoming the monsters you tried to make us. The broadcast continued for hours, document after document, recording after recording, until the full scope of the Council's crimes was laid bare for all to see. Council did not fall to human weapons. It fell to the truth within days of the broadcast. Protests erupted on worlds across the galaxy. Citizens of Council species demanding to know why their leaders had committed such atrocities in their name within weeks. 8 of the 12 founding species had formally withdrawn from the Council. Their governments collapsed under the weight of public outrage within months. The Council itself had dissolved, its leaders either fleeing into hiding or facing tribunals on their own worlds. High Councilor Vethan was captured by his own people and put on trial for crimes against sentient life. The trial lasted 2 years, and when it was over, he was sentenced to spend the rest of his existence in a prison ship orbiting Luminara, forced to look upon the world he had destroyed for the remainder of his days. Humanity could have claimed dominion over the galaxy. After that, they had the ships and the soldiers and the reputation to make it happen. And no one would have been able to stop them. They chose a different path. The first thing they built was a memorial on Luminara, a vast garden covering the site where the Velith capital city had once stood human. Scientists worked for years to create a new species of flower, plants that had been gene-crafted to bioluminesce in the same colors the Velith had displayed, glowing gold and violet and amber in patterns that shifted like living things. The garden was tended by human volunteers, people who traveled from Earth to spend months caring for the flowers, pulling weeds and maintaining the grounds, keeping the memory of the Velith alive through their labor. At the center of the garden stood a monument carved from black stone, and on that monument was inscribed a message in 100 different languages. Here the Velith sang their final song. Here humanity learned to listen. Here we swear never again. Ambassador Elena Vasquez, now elderly but still serving, attended the dedication ceremony and stood before the monument for a long time. Without speaking, she had been Shalvar's friend for 40 years before the massacre, had shared meals and conversations and quiet moments with the gentle alien who had believed so strongly in humanity's potential. She had listened to Shalvar's final transmission 1,000 times since that day, had memorized every word, had carried the weight of her friend's faith like a burden and a gift. "We proved you right," she said finally, speaking to the monument as if Shelvar could hear her. "We proved you right in the only way that mattered." The garden glowed softly around her, gold and violet and amber, as if the Velith were answering in the years that followed. Humanity took on a new role in the galaxy, not as conquerors or rulers, but as something else entirely. They became protectors when the strong threatened the weak. Human ships appeared to intervene when species needed help. Human hands were there to offer it when the galaxy needed to be reminded that compassion was not weakness. Humanity stood as living proof. They had learned to speak the language of fire, had mastered it better than any species in history. But they chose to speak other languages, to languages of kindness and mercy and second chances, languages the Velith had taught them. The galaxy had spoken to humanity in fire, trying to burn them into submission, trying to reduce them to ash like their Velith friends. But humanity had answered, and in answering, had taught the stars a truth that would echo through the ages. Some fires do not destroy. Some fires illuminate, and some bonds, once forged in the flames of tragedy, can never be broken. The Velith had believed in humanity, had died believing, had sung their hope into the void with their final breaths. Humanity had caught that song and carried it forward, transforming grief into purpose, rage into justice, love into legacy. The stars remembered the Velith through the garden on Luminara, through the ships that bore their names, through the humans who told their stories to each new generation, and somewhere, perhaps in whatever came after death for gentle beings of light and song, Shelvera smiled. Her burning-hearted friends had proven worthy after all.